Howdy, historians. Welcome to the last unit of the year. Get happy, get sad. I don't know. That's up to you. Usually it's a lot more enjoyable when we're in class. We can say that, here's the last unit, and be able to say like, and here's the last day of notes. But, that's obviously, something we just celebrate remotely now. But we're going to look at Africa. We're singing that Shakira song. Part 1, Section 1 of the unit, we're looking at the geography of Africa, then the different regions of Africa, and the African kingdoms, ancient African kingdoms, and then Section 2, we're looking at imperialism, what it is and how it has impacted Africa. So a relatively short unit, but a lot of good stuff going on, lots of interesting stuff as we get ready to look at Section 1, African climates, economies, and cultures. So that's what we want to jump in on. Just on the title slide here, you can see a topographical map here for Africa. Now over here on the right side, you can see size comparisons for various countries and then regions like Western and Eastern Europe and how they could fit inside Africa. Africa is very large. After Asia, it's the second largest continent. Africa covers 1/5 of all of the Earth's surface. There's your fun fact for the day. But their geography and their regions and their climates are very different, very diversified. With the great size comes a lot of diversity like we see in the Americas and in Asia as well. So let's go ahead and hop into it here. Boop, pop that back up and start to talk about how geography impacts Africa. Well, the first thing we already talked about on the intro, Africa is very large. Because of that, there's going to be a lot of diversity when it comes to their geography, and there's going to be lots of different climate zones. Okay, so you see lots of different types of climates across the African continent. And remember, Africa's a continent, not a country. There are many countries on the continent of Africa. All right, we have tropical forests, we have deserts, we have grasslands, we have Mediterranean climates. There's all kinds of climate zones that we can find across the continent. So let's take a look at some of these different climate zones and start to understand what these different climate zones are and get some definitions for what these different climate zones mean. So we'll go north to south as we talk about the various climate zones that Africa has. So in the very northern area, you can see what they call the Mediterranean climate. It's there in kind of like the red highlight there. The Mediterranean climate is going to be very nice. It's almost like tropical. You're going to have good precipitation. You're going to have some changes of seasons, but it's going to be a lot, almost like perpetual summer. Yeah, buddy.
What's that day?
That's a map of Africa, of their different climate zones. Here, come here.
No.
Okay. All right, so up in the top you have the Mediterranean. Then you're going to have this brown, which doesn't have a key. That's going to be like semi-Mediterranean. Basically, it's going to be a nice region. Then as we get into this giant white portion here, now we're into desert. All right, Africa is home to one of the largest deserts in the world, the Sahara. It's, a desert. What you really want to think about as a desert, it is just like a giant death zone. It is so difficult for people and plants and animals to live. So the Sahara in the north, it's the world's largest desert. We have smaller deserts that aren't quite well represented on this map, but you have the smaller deserts of the Namib and the Kalahari that are down in the southern portion. All right, so it's really what you call more of like a semi-desert region. They're going to see here. But the the Sahara is the big one up here. All right. Then when you get into the yellow, you've got some semi-desert. Now you see this one of three greens. All right. This is dry savanna. All right, Madagascar, and then some regions in the south and in the east and in kind of the central and western portions. All right, whenever you hear savanna, you've got dry savanna here, and then in the brighter green, you have a wet savanna. Savanna means grassland. All right, so that is what savanna actually means. This is the largest and most populated climate zone in Africa, savannas, the grassy plains. Typically, you're going to see good soils. Now, in the dry areas, you're going to get irregular rainfall, which can cause some deadly droughts. You see a lot of cattle herding in the dry areas. And then in the humid savanna, you're going to get a lot of good farming with good soil. In the dark, very hunter green, that's your tropical rainforest. Some of the densest, thickest thickest tropical rainforests that the world knows in Africa. And then as we come down here, again, another stretch of desert, and then a little bit more Mediterranean climate as well. So there's, and then remember, these browns are like semi-Mediterranean. Okay, so they're also nice climates. So there's a lot of diversity of climate zones across Africa, which makes it very difficult to move around, because all these different climate zones, the same plants and animals can't be present in all these different areas. We know that from talking about gums, germs, and steel, and the orientation of continents. So their climates are incredibly different. And again, as I kind of just started to preview, that makes the movement of people very difficult across Africa. It's very hard to cross some of these climate zones. I'll just grab this for a second here. Okay, so there's a couple different reasons why it's difficult to move around in here. All right, so one, of course, you've got the desert. All right, desert is going to be very, very difficult to go through. The semi-desert is going to be very, very difficult to go through. And honestly, the tropical rainforest is very difficult too. It's so thick, it's so dense, it's very easy to get lost in rainforests. There's lots of dangerous plants, there's dangerous animals, there's dangerous insects, and it's just like thick. Like, it's very difficult to actually be able to move through. So part of why it's hard to get around Africa is just because of its north-south orientation, right, which we've talked about in class before. Part of it is from its various climate zones. Everywhere you go, you're going through a different new climate zone that's going to make it very difficult to move around. The other thing that makes it difficult to move around in Africa is that the center of the continent, kind of if you would go like this, the center of the continent is very high, and then everything out here is relatively low. So it's like there's a giant plateau. So whenever you're trying to go across the continent, north, south, east, west, it's like you're always going uphill in a way. And this also makes it really difficult because then all of the rivers have huge waterfalls because all of the rivers flow out to the ocean, right? So as the rivers all flow out towards the oceans, you get these huge waterfalls, which makes river travel very difficult. We've talked about it before. That's the easiest way to move around. Right? The easiest way to move around is to do so by river. That's just not an option for people in Africa historically. So it's very, very difficult to get around. Super difficult to get around across the climate. All right, now come on, let me get rid of this. Why isn't it? Hold on. All right, there we go. There we go. Now we're all set. Now we're good to go. Okay, so movement is very difficult. All right, so we know if you want cultural diffusion, if you want societal advancement, you have to have easy movement. Not going to be the case in Africa. Last part for geography and how it impacts Africa are resources. Africa is very, very rich in resources. If we grab this map here, we can see lots and lots and lots of different resources. Cocoa, coffee, corn, cotton, dates, fruit, rice, palm oil, peanuts, rubber, tobacco, vineyards, wheat, and then there's all kinds of other stuff, right? There's lots of precious minerals like diamonds in Africa as well. So when Africans were able to move, they had a number of resources that were, and still are, in demand. Salt, gold, iron, copper, diamonds, oil, hides, pelts, rubber, timber. So they're resource rich, but it's hard to cash in on that and take advantage of that because it was so hard to travel across the continent. So the geography is very diverse. There's all these different countries that make up the continent of Africa. Some of them are very rich in their resources. Some of them are very poor in their resources, depending on what geographic region they find themselves in. But all of them are kind of hindered and held back from the geography of the continent. But there's potential there with all of these resources and with some good farmland and with some nice climate, but then also some really, really tough climate with those rainforests and the desert as well. So that's Africa Part 1. Kind of a quick little shorty here, just as we go over the big ideas for the geography of Africa. Hop over to Africa Part 2, where we're going to start to look at specific regions of Africa. So the first one we're going to look at is North Africa. But hop over to Africa Part 2 so we can get that party started. All right, good job. Adios.